Hello, and welcome to Powering Up with Open Source Essential Tools for IT Professionals. Thanks for joining us today. Livestream begins all of our webinars with your sound on mute. If you can't hear us, click on the screen to turn on the sound. Your microphone will remain muted, but please use the chat to talk to us. And while you're there, drop us a note, let us know where you're dialing in from today. If the alerts are too much, you can mute them by clicking on the bell on the right-hand side. You will automatically get a recording. But if you would like the presentation slides, we have a lot of links in our presentation today. Please email me, virginia@criticalinsight.com, and I'd be happy to share that deck with you. Today, our presenters, I would like to introduce to you, for your viewing pleasure, Mike Hamilton and Fred Langston, who are the co-founders of Critical Insight. Mike is currently the CISO here and is the former CISO for the city of Seattle. Aside from his daily cyber briefing emails, you can find him frequently quoted in major media publications. Fred is the current Chief Product Officer for Critical Insight and has been an InfoSec pioneer and industry expert for over 2 decades. He was an author of the HIPAA Security Rule. You can find both of these experts on multiple thought leadership articles in LinkedIn and on multiple conferences throughout the year. And I'm your host, Virginia. Let's get started. Mike, off to you.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Good afternoon to everyone except people living in Hawaii and out of the United States. So first of all, just a little preliminary stuff. So we're not advocating for any specific product here. We've used a lot of these things, but we're not really here to hawk product, right? We just don't do that. There are a lot of organizations that just do not have the financial resources to go out and buy tools from CrowdStrike and Microsoft and SentinelOne, anybody. So we thought it would be a good idea to talk about open source tools and where they can fit into regulatory compliance and aligning with standards of practice. So there's lots and lots and lots of these lists, right? And there's going to be people here who have favorite open source tools and why didn't you talk about this one? All right, this is a non-exhaustive list. A lot of these, you do need to be careful if you're going to implement these tools to get them from an authoritative source. Because as you probably know, there are a lot of tools out there that get booby-trapped, and they are in app stores and other places other than the authoritative source. So make sure when you get them from the right place. Most of these you compile from source. You can get them from GitHub, but there's a lot of them that have binary images that you can just download as an executable. There's also some of these have the freemium model. So, you know, if you want extra capabilities, you got to pay for it. So there's a disclaimer, how to use this stuff. So there are areas of focus within the NIST cybersecurity framework. And remember, the cybersecurity framework is an outcome-based framework. It doesn't say have this control in place. It says make this thing happen. Well, how you make that happen is really up to you, your organization, the resources that you have. So open source really can fit into a lot of these places. For healthcare, the cybersecurity performance goals, right? There's no reason that you can't use tools like this to comply with those cybersecurity performance goals and make it so that if and when an event happens, you can demonstrate that you had appropriate controls in place because these are perfectly appropriate controls. So, you know, a lot of these you might just want to put in to augment the controls that you have for a little extra monitoring, or maybe you want to try a new encryption tool, something like that. But really, if you assess your organization, and if you need consultants to assess your organization, we know where they are. But then find out where your gaps are, and some of those gaps you can close with open source tools. Perfectly good. Okay, so let's talk about open source tools that are broken out into a number of categories. So first of all, discovery vulnerability scanning. Some of these are for detecting vulnerabilities in source code. There's actually a very good large language model that you can use to find vulnerabilities in Python code. We didn't include that one here because it's a little exotic, but Git leaks, right? Open source solution for detecting secrets in your code. Gripe is a pretty good vulnerability scanner, and it works for Docker containers and things that are not just looking at the outward expression of a service, right? So for example, a computer has got port 22 open for an SSH login, right? And a vulnerability scanner will go knock on that port and say, what are you? And it will say, well, here's my login banner. I'm SSH version blah, 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 right? So that's usually what you think of as a vulnerability scanner, but a lot of these things are for scanning binaries, for scanning source code, for scanning containers, etc. Some of the ones that I have used, everybody should be familiar with Nmap, right? Network map. Also ZenMap, if you're not a command line person and you want to use a pointy clicky thing that will give you a nice map of what's on your network. These are good to take home and use on your home network, and you will find things there you didn't know about. Who knew that I bought that many Amazon things, right? You will find these all over the place. OpenVAS, right? Vulnerability assessment tool. Netbox is a really interesting discovery tool. So for finding what it is you have on your network, because honestly, many of us, most of us, probably don't really know everything that's on the network. Netbox is a really great discovery tool, and it's included in another product that I'll tell you about when we get down the line. We're talking about monitoring, etc. So there's our great Nmap logo there. Here's an example. So OpenVAS, here's its console. It does a pretty good job of graphically telling you where vulnerabilities are, and it maps to the identify focus area for the NIST cybersecurity framework. So you could grab OpenVAS and scan your network and give yourself a list of everything it found out there, and that's a pretty good inventory of what's on your network. And if the auditors show up later and say, well, did you discover everything on your network? Did you identify things? And you've gone through the NIST framework and you said, yeah, I did that. You can back that up. So OpenVAS is probably not my favorite. A lot of people use Nessus. It's not open source, but there's a version of Nessus that's for free use. This one's definitely open source. And so the open source things are continually worked on by mostly volunteers. And one of the scanners that you might want to be interested in are the new scanners that do SBOM scanning, right? So software bill of materials. There are multiple scanners that will look at your software and then map all the components back to their origins. So if you've implemented that OpenSSL library, it knows it. And then if the OpenSSL library comes up with a vulnerability, your product has that vulnerability. So the SBOM scanners are actually pretty good and very timely, as now we're moving into this area where the federal government is not going to buy your product if it doesn't have a software bill of materials to go along with it. Right? Handy stuff. Firewalls. Okay, so we talked about identify. This must be protect. There's a lot of these firewalls. The ones that I have the most experience with myself is DDWRT. I'll talk about that in a second. The one in red there is the Firewall Toolkit. And Firewall, keep me honest, Fred, was written by Marcus Raynham.
Correct.
And long time ago, and open sourced it, said anybody can use this, and it was a really great tool to turn a BSD box into a really functional firewall. And in fact, Fred and I started a company in 1994, hand-rolling firewalls with the Firewall Toolkit and a whole bunch of other open source things, and selling them in Southern California. And that's kind of how we got started in all this. pfSense is the one that is really recognized as kind of the top Linux-based firewall. And I'll show you a screenshot of that in a minute. DDWRT, the reason I like this is because you can bop on down to Goodwill, buy yourself a perfectly usable Cisco access point for $5, flash it with the DDWRT firmware, and all of a sudden it's a firewall. And it will still be your wireless access point. It will still have wired capability. But what you can do, and I really recommend that you do this, put it inside your cable modem, right? Your home ISP connection, because that cable modem is really dubious with respect to whether or not the ISP is patching it. So you don't want an unpatched device there out on the edge of your network when we know that there are countries that have been compromising consumer grade stuff like that in order to set up this giant proxy network so that they can attack from what looks to be an American source. Okay, you don't want your home to be used for that. Worse, you don't want your home infiltrated. So since we don't know if those things are being patched regularly or not, firewall yourself off from that and turn off the Wi-Fi on your your Comcast router or whatever, and then let the Wi-Fi off of your new DDWRT firewall do that. So there's a number of these. Again, this is not exhaustive. There are more than this. These are the ones that I think are most widely known. Note that Bunker Web there is a web application firewall. So that's what you put in front of a web app to guard against things like SQL injection, cross-site scripting attacks, things like that. So here's pfSense, and this definitely maps to the protect bucket of the NIST cybersecurity framework. So now most organizations have firewalls, right? I mean, we're not going to say, hey, if you don't have a firewall, use this, because you got a firewall. However, if you are in a smaller organization, perhaps a public utility, something like that, and you want to firewall yourself off, or you want to segment your network, perfectly good to use this. This is a Linux operating system firewall, and it is the most widely used as far as I know. A lot of folks here use this at home. Like I said, I use the WRT firewall. Got a pretty good graphical interface here, not unlike what you find on your home router, but definitely is more focused on being a firewall than being your connection to the rest of the world. Okay, open source EDR, that's endpoint detection and response / antivirus agents, because there's a little bit of just a naming convention there. Some of these are more antivirus, just signature-based antivirus. Some of these have more capabilities, for example, anomaly detection. And if you look at all these, the one that is known to be a old-timey Linux antivirus agent is ClamAV. Probably not the best one, but it has been around for a very long time, so development has moved along. OS Query, really great. Being able to ask all of your endpoints a question just gives you incredible visibility. OSSEC, same kind of things. It will monitor the registry for changes. HIPS, right? So host intrusion prevention, host intrusion detection, log analysis. OSSEC is pretty full-featured and very functional. Watchtower starts getting into more incident response capabilities, and Velociraptor is a good one mostly because it's cross-platform. It can be used on different operating systems, and also used to deploy those OS query agents out there. So using something like this, like Velociraptor, and then the OS query agents out there, you can have very, very good visibility into events that are occurring on your endpoints. Here now we're getting into monitoring, and monitoring is frankly the best place that you can spend your open source money, which is zero. And I say that because for the most part, networks all have preventive controls in place. We got firewalls, we train our users, we manage our vulnerabilities. Hopefully that's a hard thing to do now. Filter your email. All those controls are designed to prevent a bad business outcome, right? Records disclosure, theft, extortion, et cetera, right? But those preventive controls are going to fail. We are up against extremely well-resourced, highly motivated, and very skilled groups of criminals that are global. And a lot of these are domestic now. And if they target you, they're going to get you. Their reach is expanding, and the subset of businesses that are being affected by this are no longer relegated to the big businesses, the hospitals, the schools, the local governments, right? The ones that are the easiest to knock over. Now it's going to be small and medium business. And so that sphere is expanding out there, and they're using vulnerability scanners that will identify and then exploit a vulnerability. So you want to monitor your network for impact management, right? Something can get on a computer that you don't want to be there. But if you detect it and get rid of it before it pulls the trigger and turns into ransomware or some other extortion, no harm, no foul. And the way you do that is to monitor your network. So there's a lot of good monitoring tools. CELTS, okay, Suricata is a very good IDS. Snort is really the original IDS and was bought by Cisco. So now it's part of Cisco products, but there's still open source signatures for this. Zeek, very good, also open source network traffic monitoring. Security Onion, might not really belong on this list, but it's a collection of tools that in aggregate can be used for good investigation and good detection of what's going on in your network. The ones that I really like that are really pervasively used are the Elk Stack, okay, Elasticsearch, Logstash, and Kibana. So Elastic is the unstructured database. Kibana is the tool that you use to query that database. Logstash is kind of the mechanism that gets it from where it's originated into that unstructured database. And along with Elk is Malcolm. And a lot of people don't know about Malcolm because it's pretty new. Malcolm was funded by the Department of Homeland Security and developed at Idaho National Lab. Malcolm has the capability of monitoring protocols that are for operational technologies. So the DCOM serial protocol, for example. So it can monitor programmable logic controllers, remote terminal units, basically the components of your SCADA system. So Homeland Security has actually approached the Pisces Project, which are a sister nonprofit organization, to talk about deploying the Malcolm stack into public utilities, notably water utilities, because water is under attack and very poorly protected. So let's look at a little bit of Malcolm here. So while Kibana is the tool that you use to query an Elastic database, Malcolm, which is very much like Elastic, uses OpenSearch. And it comes with another tool called Archemy, which is the bottom right there. And I know that these are a little tough to see because these are screenshots that have got a lot of detail in them. This presentation is to give away to anybody that wants it. So you'll just contact us and we'll send you the original slides so all the links in here work. So that's Malcolm. And if you are interested in Malcolm, it's malcolm.fyi. I don't know why they chose that top level domain, but okay, there you go. And it is very, very actively developed. And when you look at the number of protocols that it supports, you'll be surprised. So as this thing begins to mature, we are replacing our Pisces stack with a Malcolm stack so that we can then move into monitoring public utilities and things like that. Packet analysis and forensics. Okay, so now we're getting into respond, recover, right? So Ghidra, okay, is a reverse engineering framework, right? So if you wanted to take a piece of malware and reverse engineer it, maybe you're a researcher and you can find clues in there to help you do attribution, right? Who did this? Who wrote this, right? Radare is another open source reverse engineering framework. You can also use reverse engineering to take a patch that was just given to you by Microsoft or Cisco or somebody, reverse engineer that, figure out what it fixes so that you can design the exploit to break that thing. And that's what the bad guys are doing. So when a patch is released and a vulnerability is announced, they're going to use tools like this to reverse engineer the patch to build the exploit. So yes, these tools can be used for multiple purposes, some good, some bad. Debugger for Windows, kind of the same thing. Wireshark, that's a screenshot from Wireshark, and I think a lot of people have experience with Wireshark. That's the packet analyzer of record for lots and lots of people. We do investigations with Wireshark when we need to replay a packet capture to find out exactly what happened here. Bloodhound, and Bloodhound is for incident response forensics and kind of case management. So Bloodhound's really great tool if you're going to do your own forensics. I would remind everyone that if you have an actual event, the first line in your insurance policy probably says call the insurance company first, and they are going to send in the smoke jumpers with the Q-tips and toothpicks to do that kind of work. And you really don't want to start that under those kinds of circumstances because that could void your policy. Okay, so here's Bloodhound and Autopsy. And Bloodhound obviously shows you that attack path right there. It has a great graphical interface. It's useful for a lot of things, but really notable for here's how this attack propagated. And there's Autopsy right there, which can do the forensics. And in this context, forensics is taking apart a drive, right, some digital media, and finding all the clues in there deleted files, right? That's the tip of the iceberg. But finding out what changes have been made, what caused those changes to be made, finding all those fingerprints in there to do the forensics and come up with the what happened here story. So again, not the kind of thing you want to be messing with if you're in the middle of an actual event that requires your insurance company to be involved, because this would just get in their way and they would say, well, then we're not going to honor the policy. Now, do I know that that'll happen for a fact? No, but it is a risk. Okay. Open source intelligence and threat intel. So there are lots of good tools for this. The one Fred likes that he can talk quite a bit about is Spiderfoot. And there is a lot of different sources that you can point this at, and it will give you really great data. So you can have this, for example, look at your cloud exposures. You can have it look at Active Directory. You can have it find email addresses for a name that you give it. I mean, it's really, really versatile tool, and it's fairly new. MISP is a lot like STIX, the Structured Threat Information Exchange, but MISP is the next generation of that. So how it works is you have a MISP server, and it uses a transport mechanism where it can talk to other servers like itself. And you discover a threat, some kind of thing happened. And it's got a certain format that you fill out, and you describe that threat, and you say, go. And then that server will talk to every other server that you have an agreement with to exchange data, and that threat will be put into the visibility of those other servers, and then it's taken from there, and you create a detection analytic with it. So if you have a number of these sources, for example, AT&T has a free feed, Multi-State ISAC has a feed. When you're exchanging threat information like this, it's a way of getting information out there right away so that everyone is protected based on one single entity finding something that everybody needs to know about. And it's all automated. So when you ingest one of these things, there's a process by where you turn that into a detection analytic. And depending on what your monitoring infrastructure is, that slides right in so that if that threat is encountered, you get an alert. Right? Good stuff. OpenCTI, again, cyber threat intelligence. Maltego. Maltego is the granddaddy. Maltego is what you use if, again, there are nefarious uses for these things, but if you wanted to investigate someone and you wanted to find out all of their email addresses, everywhere they post online and social media, all kinds of juicy details about them, so that you can basically, create a dossier on someone and use that for hopefully good purposes. But Maltego is the one to use. And it's got a community edition to where you use their servers really to use it. You want to buy it, you want to license it, you want to set it up on your own server. Now, Maltego, again, is it's quite a bit to work with. And Spiderfoot and Maltego both use this concept of objects, right? So a name is an object, an email address is an object, and it figures out how to associate and correlate these objects out in internet space. And this is really the tool of record for espionage, but it is very good for doing your own open source intelligence. And open source intelligence, OSINT, is a field that is kind of reached its own at this point. I know that Black Hat gives awards out for people that are particularly good at open source intelligence. These are the tools they use. So you can see Spiderfoot there. It's talking about external accounts, email addresses, human name, et cetera, et cetera. Maltego here on the right, kind of doing the same thing graphically. They're not super easy to use. You need to understand the parlance, right? The how they name things and what you're looking for. I found Maltego, the recent version, much harder to use than previous versions, but it is a great tool. Encryption. Okay, so encryption in the day of quantum computing might be just completely nullified. But until we get there, here's some encryption tools. So some of these are more for certificate and key management. So for example, if you wanted to do 802.1x and you wanted to have all of the devices in your network assigned a certificate so that they can identify themselves as a device on the network that is okay to be there, you'd want to use some kind of certificate authority. So there's Let's Encrypt. Let's Encrypt is the very popular one and is responsible for lots and lots and lots of websites becoming SSL enabled, whereas before they were not. Secretive, again, is for managing SSH keys. It's not really a certificate authority. It's really a key vault. And then there's GPG. GPG is a permutation of PGP. So there's an organization called GNU, GNU, which means GNU's not Unix. And PGP is pretty good privacy. And the GNU people pick up a tool, will rename it slightly and cleverly, and make it their own. So they turn PGP into GPG, the GNU Privacy Guard. It's really good for as a plugin for email, so that if you use Thunderbird, right, which comes with Firefox as your email client, you can plug in GPG and be able to encrypt email and keep that private. And today, privacy is becoming more and more important. The surveilling that's going on by ad industries and espionage agents and who else, it is crazy. So the more you implement privacy tools, the better off you're going to be in the long term, especially if you're doing something that you want to keep private. And I'm not going to suggest what that is, but there's lots of things that we like to keep private and out of the public sphere, and these are really great tools for this. There's also Enigmail, which is OpenPGP for, again, Thunderbird email, right? We can just plug that GPG right in there. So here's some encryption tools. The one that's not listed here, because I think everybody just knows it, is SSH, Secure Shell. So that's for interactive logins over an encrypted tunnel so that you can log into a system and do command line interface work there. So here's OpenPGP. And I will say this, if you're going to implement PGP, GPG, and you're going to be able to use the command line to do things like encrypt a file so that you can attach it later, you need to know something about public key cryptography, because you can screw this up. It's not hard to learn about the difference between a public key and a private key and what they're used for. Don't confuse those two things. So here's creating an OpenPGP key. Right, you'll create the public key. You'll give the public key away to everybody. That's why it's public. You'll keep the private key private, and then there are certain things that you do to sign and your emails, encrypt messages, files, things like that. The really good thing, one of the really good things about public key cryptography is it provides non-repudiation control, so that if you sign something, you will never be able to say, no one will ever be able to say you didn't do that. Yeah, I proved it. I did it, right? That's called non-repudiation. So OpenPGP, great tool. All right, Fred, I'm going to give this over to you because we have looked at a lot of tools here. We've seen how they map to the NIST cybersecurity framework as perfectly allowable controls that you can put in place to satisfy that standard of practice, with a little bit of storytelling there. And why don't you show us how to build something with all of this?
Sure. So, one of my jobs as chief product officer is to keep my eye on what is being used out, especially in the open source world. We may incorporate either some of the ideas or, in fact, some of those components into our services. So one of the things I do, and I maintain exactly what I'm going to talk about here. I have it's an automated pen testing, although that term is very flaky. I don't really like it. It kind of means do a bunch of the stuff that you would normally do in an automated fashion, but it's not complete pen testing. Attack surface management, which is vulnerability scanning. It's the OSINT stuff. It's everything you can learn to use to take advantage of a particular target, and some stuff about looking at the cloud and protecting assets in the cloud. So I'm going to talk about how we go about this. How do you go about building this? Well, the first thing you need to understand is, what are you trying to build, right? Are you building something that's going to be looking at the network? Is it going to be something where you're cracking or looking at web apps? Is it mobile applications? Are you doing this to have a beefy box to do open source intelligence? So you need to identify, what am I going to build this box to do? I'm going to test the network, test web apps, test these different things. So you need to point out and say, because what the tools you're going to use, the types of system you're going to use, all these things are relevant. So you got to know up ahead what you're going to do. Then you need to know what kind of components of that that a process are you going to use, or the methods. If you look at Kali Linux, they have 13 different areas. They say, here's sets of tools that do these specific things. I would suggest using this list and saying to yourself, am I really going to try to build a box that does all these things? Well, maybe. If I am, I'm going to have one or two tools in each category. If I'm going to be building a box that, hey, I just want to do web application, reconnaissance, testing, and reverse engineering and exploitation, then I'm going to focus just on maybe a 3 or 4 of these kind of functional areas that I'm going to look for tools or a tool framework that will help me do all these things. So you need to understand, what am I testing? And what things am I trying to get out of the testing when I do it, right? And it may be end to end, right? If I'm looking at being an end-to-end pen tester, I'm probably going to build a system that has almost everything on it, like a Kali Linux box that has absolutely every package installed on it. Will give you these capabilities, but you have to have a box that's capable of doing that, right? So once you figured out, I want to do, for example, web application analysis, there's a database part of it. I'm going to try to do some password attacks. I'm going to exploit, and I'm going to do some post-exploitation work. So then I'm going to go and I'm going to start looking for tools. And we'll talk a little bit about where you go, but it's the internet. And in fact, it's 90% of the time, it's going to be GitHub, because GitHub tends to be where the world stores their tools for you to go get an account and download. And I'll talk about what GitHub is if you don't know what that is in a minute. You got to understand the machine now. Now that I know the tools, what I'm trying to do, the systems I'm attacking, I then need to know, what do I need to build into the hardware? If I'm doing wireless work, I'm going to have a number of wireless cards, probably a bunch of different functionalities in those wireless cards. I may have a radio card I want to put in there. If I'm doing cracking, I'm going to be probably trying to build a big beefy box that's got a bunch of GPUs that I'm going to be pointing all the cracking at. So that's a different box, right, than the other one. And if I'm doing like pen testing, or I'm running a bunch of tools, I'm probably going to want something that's going to run a virtual machine, or is running virtual machines, and probably has the capability to run containers, because a lot of these tools run in containers, in particular Docker usually. Once you get through all that, then there's a part that comes, the painful part, and that is all of these tools, not all, but most of them, have some cost associated with it, not on the front end, although their licenses will tell you how you can use the software. You should read them. But it will also have APIs that you connect to. So in particular, the open source intelligence world, things that are doing scanning and attacking, are going to want to connect to databases out on the internet. Might be VirusTotal, for example. It could be Have I Been Pwned, right? It could be any number of these, right? And you're going to pay for every one of those API keys. Now, they have free ones where you get 5 queries a day. Well, the first time you run any of these tools, you'll blow past a free 5 queries a day instantly. So you need to say, well, I need to buy a plan with these APIs out there, and I need to factor that cost in. So there are usually some costs that come from running these. You need to understand those. Some of these tools, you read them and you go, wow, this does everything. It's so cool. Well, we'll talk about Spiderfoot, and there's over 60, I think, we'll look at the slide, but there's 60 or 70 API keys, secrets, and URLs you need to enter in for it to become really useful. So your costs, you may say, well, I only need these API keys, and I'm not going to go the full Cadillac route and get all the API keys. So cost management, cost management is important here. You'll want to sit at the end of this, say, am I buying these? Maybe I should just pay for some commercial stuff because the cost to build is more expensive, or the data costs or the API costs are more expensive. So at the end, you want to calculate what does it cost to operate this, right? So this is a process. Don't come into this and just think, I'm going to go download a tool and go have fun. Be very deliberative, be very deliberate on how you approach this, put a plan together, understand what it's going to cost in the long run to maintain, operate, and run these tools. Because while free is what we all are shooting for here, nothing here really is totally free. So how do we make this real? Well, we want to build the systems and we need to tune those systems. So if we're going to be doing something that is really heavily using file handles, we're going to want to make sure our system is tuned, optimized to do that. In other words, it's opening 1 million files, looking at things at once. That's a differently tuned system that's sending out 1 million packets at the same time across the network, right? So we want to know what we're trying to do, want to build and tune that system to meet that. Once we have our system built, we're going to install our tools. Well, it's more than installation. And I'll talk a little bit about how that goes when I get to a GitHub slide, but there's an installation process. You need to kind of do some testing. Did the installation go in right? There's always a tuning process to make these tools work appropriately. Most of these tools have extended update processes. Some of the ones that are large, like automated attack surface management, which are running dozens of open source tools behind one major kind of framework engine. Those have processes that can take 5-6 hours to go through and update all the tools every time you want to run it. So you need to understand what the update process is like for that tool set. You also need to do something you probably haven't thought about, and that is you need to build systems to test against. You can use intentionally vulnerable websites. There are a published list. We got a list there. You can go to that link, and I think there's 12 of them out there that are famous, like Hack Me,
Hack in the Box,
Hack in the Box, and so there's a whole bunch out there. But I suggest you build some of the systems and run them yourself. One I use on my toolkit is always OWASP. It's called Matilda 2. It's a vulnerable web app that you can turn on different vulnerabilities and turn off things and have differing levels of vulnerability. So you can test your tools. You can test specific methods. You can say, are my tools doing what I think they're doing? Because when you're running some of these tools, they run for 2 hours. They kick out some results. Did it really work? I don't know. Well, you need to test. You need to make sure that you understand how they're working, because some of these tools need more things. You need to do more than you may think at the surface. So you need to learn how to use these using these sites. There's also VulnHub, which has a whole set of, we call the DVLs. They call them damn vulnerable Linux distros. And there's about 15 of those. You can download those as images. Metasploitable 2. If you're running Metasploit, they have an image that you use specifically to point Metasploit when you're learning that framework and attack that particular system, because it has a vulnerability to match every function within Metasploit itself. So you're going to need to install these. Most of the time they're running as images or Docker containers, right? So you need to probably build a system. When we're talking about what it should be on the system and the system requirements, it's going to need to run virtual machines. I recommend, if you've got like a Ubuntu box, use Oracle VirtualBox. It's free. It's full function. It handles multiple different types of virtual images. So use that. Load up your virtual images. Run them all on one box. So when you're using the attacking on the network, it looks like different IPs in different boxes, but it's all one box, right? And you've loaded all these images and these containers up on the same system. You're attacking one system. It looks like a whole network. There are also, I didn't list it here, but there are systems that will roll out entirely vulnerable Active Directory for us. We also use that in our own environment when we're doing testing, where there's one where you just hit a button and it will like reshuffle the deck on like over 400 AD objects, making these 30 vulnerable and these other 370 not. And then the next time you shuffle the deck, it's these 85 are vulnerable and these are not, right? So there are these tools you want to use to build a target environment to test these things. Probably you don't want to be testing it in a real client engagement because sometimes these things break things, right? They're open source. This is not, Microsoft tested 5, layers of testing. This is somebody out there putting it up on a GitHub repo, people using it and posting, it didn't work here. It broke this. That's why you see them going through various versions as people are helping to refine these tools. In essence, you're probably using tools that are in a constant state of development when you're doing this. Once you're finally out, once you've finally done all this testing, then you got to do a live fire test. That's a real engagement. That's a real test on your own network. Most of this stuff we use to test our own network. Certainly, I help our pen testing team when I come across a cool tool. But I want to know, right? I want to be able to run these things repeatedly. I can't ask them, when they're delivering 5 pen tests a week to come out and spend every 3 weeks come out and do a test on us. So I use these automated tools, these things to go out and look on the web or the dark web to see if all of a sudden our information is now showing up out there. So you have to operate them, right? Operating them means making sure you know exactly how to use the tool. Some of these are very complex. Some of them are brain dead easy. So is the full spectrum from this is, you put an IP address and hit go. And there's other ones where it's literally popping shells and waiting for you to put input into the system so you can further the attack to move downstream. So a complete world of levels of operation. You need to know what they do and how to operate them. And like I said, updating, maintaining, keeping these as updated. These are being updated in real time. So you can go out and what was working 1 week ago may have changed. And the other thing that happens is people that use APIs will change their APIs. And all of a sudden an API will stop working and you have to go get an update. So you need to be constantly on top of, here's the things I've installed. Have changes been made? Have changes been made to the things they connect to? And do I need to address any of those to make sure they work? Now, another question is, what platform do we want to build these things on? Well, I will tell you, I use not just Windows, not just Linux. I use Docker as well. I use all three, partially because some work really well on virtual machines. Some are only available as containers. There are some environments that are real easy to work in. I want a quick and easy answer. Some of them are part of my workhorse machine that I do major heavy lifting on, right? So if you're in Windows, you have the Windows subsystem for Linux now, meaning I can put Kali on my Windows box. I can put Ubuntu, put Black Arch on there. I could put Parrot. I could put any of these now, can be installed right on a Windows system. And you can dual boot. It's not dual boot. It's actually a nested boot within a Windows session, a complete Linux full system. Now, do they work perfectly? Kali has some problems working perfectly on that. Do I recommend running a full Kali on my Windows subsystem for Linux? Probably not. But I do like running Ubuntu there because I have some quickie testing programs, security like Python code testing programs that when people send us Python code, I run it through a quick Python code test. I do that actually on Python in Windows. I don't even use the Windows subsystem. I just use Python at the Windows command line. And then PowerShell. PowerShell does a lot. There are entire testing frameworks now that use nothing but PowerShell. You can do almost everything you can do in Metasploit in a different distro that uses PowerShell, the corresponding sets of commands that will do the same things that you would do in Metasploit. So you can do this in Windows now, folks. I will talk how the great equalizer becomes Docker, but again, there's Linux, Kali. I always have a Kali box running. I always run all the tools on it. It is a great way to go. I'm going to find out how this tool works real quickly on something that's likely to be compiled correctly and probably operating. I say probably because even in Kali, some things that should work do not, right? And you'll find out, well, it's there. It's supposed to work, but it doesn't, right? And sometimes you have to figure out how to fix it. Ubuntu is a standard. Ubuntu runs most everything that can run on Kali. Ubuntu is very flexible. I always will have an Ubuntu running, usually on my Windows subsystem for Linux, and I'll run some very quick things like Faraday, which I'll talk about here, or some things like that, or maybe even Spiderfoot if I want something to run in the background for a long period of time. And then there's Docker. Docker, if you don't know what Docker is, it is a container running system that's built for kind of compact use. You don't need to have a VMware server. It's just a enclosed subsystem for containers that runs on your desktop, or if you're in Linux, it will run at the command line behind the scenes. But it is a way to download and quickly consume without having to compile code. So that's the key, is people are getting away from saying you need to compile code. You just now download a Docker image. So where does this stuff come from? Almost every link you're going to see from all these standard tools are stored on GitHub. GitHub is the kind of the place on the internet where all this code is stored. It's a web platform, allows people to collaborate on code projects, but it allows people like you and I to go out there and download and use these tools. It's essentially free. Everyone will have a license. You need to read what the license is. They vary. Some is completely free. Some is you can use it, but you can only use it on your own stuff. Some is you can use it, you can resell stuff. Very different. Got to read what the license depending on how you're going to use it. But when you look at a GitHub page first, it looks like, wow, this is intimidating. There's all this lines of stuff, and it looks like I'm reading code, and it's some weird directory structure, and I don't understand anything. And well, until you realize, scroll down, and then we'll have the README section. And then it will usually have and here's the installation steps. Do this, do that, do this, do that. Here's how to operate the tool. Here's the flags associated with it. So once you start getting used to it and you learn to cut and paste exactly what they're telling you to do and run those commands, you can relatively quickly learn how to use GitHub to download almost anything. Run a new container, build some file structures, usually automated, and run these tools. So this is really where you're going to find pretty much everything in this day and age when we're talking about these tools. So I'm going to start with, here's kind of the basic, this is what I build into every kind of toolkit that I'm looking for that's looking at general automated pen testing, attack surface management, operational kind of testing stuff. Nmap, as Mike said, everybody should have Nmap. Nmap runs in the front of half these tools. In fact, a lot of these, if you haven't run an Nmap scan, they won't run until you feed them an Nmap scan. So you got to have Nmap. Mike mentioned OpenVAS. There's a still free version by a company called Greenbone, right, which actually has probably a little bit better management of the updates to the vulnerability feeds they have. Has 4 different feeds it pulls from. I really like to use Greenbone as another interface, a little bit different, but another way to do it. I like Greenbone because Metasploit loves Greenbone. It loves the output. So does Kali. Kali loves output from Greenbone. So that's why I tend to use that. Faraday. Faraday is a fantastic open source project to manage vulnerabilities. You can upload Nessus. You can put in almost any scanner. It will give you a way to track them, to accept risks, to do all sorts of graphics on what's really happening in your environment. You can pull together differing types of things, prioritize remediation. It's really, really easy to install Faraday, run it. It even has agents you can deploy on systems that can be the Nessus agent for you, or a Greenbone VAS agent to go run. So it's an amazingly full-featured system. And like every one of these, everybody has, and we have our paid version, right, which adds a few more features and gets paid support. So if you decide you really like these tools, usually there's a path to pay a pretty nominal fee, and you get support that comes along with it. We're talking about what we call automated pen tests. That's the next 4 through 7 here. Joker is one I really like. It is an interface that allows you to save data, manage differing jobs in real time. So you have this job you're running here, and you're running a different one here with a different set of results. Understanding these are very complex tools that run like 30, 40, 70 other open source tools in the background. So if I install Joker or I install Sniper, it will also install 30 or 40 open source tools behind the scenes. And I will also need to update those in real time. So you can literally build out an entire attack system with all the tools by putting Joker or Sniper on, because they will automatically add those tools to your toolkit. If you want to get into something that's actually starting to get into true automated pen testing, there's some things like Auto Pen Test DRL uses deep reinforcement learning to keep evolving its attacks against systems and starts approximating an actual pen tester. But again, you need to be good at pen testing to know how to help these systems get better and tune them. OWASP Netacker, the OWASP organization, Open Web Application Security Project. Everybody should know them. Top 10 vulnerabilities, right? Famous. Well, they have things that will go out and look for exactly all of those vulnerabilities. And their Netacker is a really cool open source kind of vulnerability scanner. It's a web application scanner. It's a whole bunch of cool things that it will do and produces really nice reports.
Fred, is that the successor to the OWASP Live CD?
Yes, very much so.
Okay.
They've actually added a bunch of cool tools, frankly, over there at OWASP that some we're going to talk about here.
Okay.
Our engine, if you're doing web app testing, you're a web app tester, you want to know about your web apps, our engine is a perfect front end to do 7 or 8 or 10 or 15 things, which will also pop open these attack proxies. So it finds something, it'll pop open a proxy and go, hey, you want to have at it? I found it. It's ready to go. Start using your attack proxy to start testing this web application vulnerability. The proxies that I recommend, there's certainly, there's this Burp Suite. That's a commercial one. I think they maybe have a kind of a crippled version for the community. But you can do the same things with the Z attack proxy or ZAP, which is also actually an OWASP spinoff. It's both a web app scanner. It has a web app proxy. It will help you walk you through an app test and pop up the windows you need to actually do some testing in. Really cool. And Metasploit, right? Even though I don't say go out and buy Metasploit, the community version you install, and most of these tools will pick and pull pieces out of Metasploit. In particular, when things like Sniper or Joker find something and it pops a shell, it will then open up the Metasploit exploit thing and say, do you run this exploit against this, and actually maybe steal some information. So you're starting to get close again to an actual automated pen test at this point. So I want to talk quickly about other things. There are cloud tools to use. If you're doing forensics in Google Cloud, for example, Cirrus is a fantastic tool to go figure out what's going on in that environment. If you want to encrypt storage, you've got S3 buckets and you want to make sure they're encrypted. Cryptomator is a real nice open source tool for that. Scout Suite, if you want to learn about your security and how you're structured and the accounts you have in the cloud, Scout Suite is unbeatable as an open source tool to help you figure out what's going on in the cloud. So we always use those tools. I use another one called Deep Fence Threat Mapper, which runs in real time. And it can look and tell you the SBOM of any container. It can tell you what kind of secrets are being exposed. It can tell you things about users. It can run vulnerabilities. This is great to use. It's got a beautiful interface. So it's part of what they call cloud native application protection platform things, where I'm looking at my cloud in real time to look for vulnerabilities, vulnerable binaries, things like that. How about OSINT? Well, if you go to the ASINT collection Start Me page, this goes down, as you can see up in the upper right. This is a tiny fraction of the search sites you can go find information on people. This goes down about 7 more screens. So thousands of sites to go and find out just about anything about anyone. We want to use these in our business to find out exposed email addresses, who the officers in a company are to target in a social engineering attack, any number of things that we use them for, but you can find out just about anything. The tool I like to use, and we use all the time here, is Spiderfoot. Mike showed you kind of one of the pages, shows you a little bit of the types of things you can find out, but you can target things in a whole bunch of different ways, right? I can find absolutely everything, and that means I'm going to look at 200 different sources. I'm going to pull from 95 APIs. I'm going to pull a massive amount of data. It probably takes, for one domain, 3 or 4 days for this to complete, running 24 hours a day. Understand what you're doing when you do this. Sometimes you might want to get it down to a lesser a number of tests, like just footprinting, investigating, or doing a fully passive thing so nobody actually knows this is happening. But again, with 200 plus modules, you're covering, so I'm going to go back one, you're covering a whole bunch of these with an automated tool that will find everything. So we're always running our domain, we're running our IP space, we're running phone numbers, we're running email addresses. See, is this stuff out there? Are our key email addresses being abused somehow? And then, as Mike said, once you get there, once I use something like Spiderfoot, then I'm going to go in and I'm going to dig in a little bit deeper. I'm going to use maybe Maltego. If I'm using a social engineering and I want to really dig in and find out maybe who somebody's has a cell phone number that's unpublished that's associated with them, and I want to use a voice phishing attack against them, Maltego might be how I will take what comes out of Spiderfoot, go to Maltego, dig in deeper, or maybe one of those web pages, get more information. If I want to do Google dorking, right, using Google to find out things about people and differing types of files and things like that, Metagoofil is a great tool. And if I'm looking I want to do a quick blast to find out emails, subdomains, and things like that, I'll use the Harvester, which is a really cool tool for that as well. Folks, I think that's coming to the end. I'm going to hand it back over to Virginia.
Well, we've had quite an active chat. Thank you so much, Mike and Fred. That was a lot of information. And if you happen to miss any of that, don't worry. There is a recording that's going to automatically be sent to you after this presentation ends. It's going to go back to that email that you used to register for this event. So if you would also like the slides for this presentation with any of the updated links, please make sure to drop me an email with virginia@criticalinsight.com. I put it here in the chat for you to view as well. So we'd like to tell you a little bit about Critical Insight. We are cybersecurity as a service where we help you prepare, detect, and respond. And here is what we call our wheel of services. So while there are a lot of different open source tools for you to be able to utilize, to be able to help you help yourself, if you would like some help, we are happy to help you. And because we want to end here on time, I'm going to ask for our final thoughts after we tell you to stay connected with us, because we'd really like you to be in touch. There's a way that you can get up-to-date information, and that is to subscribe to the daily IT Security News Blast, which is curated by Mike Hamilton and has been done so for the last 15 years. You can access it from this link and also from our website. We also share free monthly security awareness trainings online. We just did ours, and so we'll be having our next one in November. And don't miss any of our upcoming panels and webinars and podcasts. And as Mike mentioned, Pisces is our nonprofit partner. And so join us over at criticalinsight.com to learn a little bit more about them. So I'd like to get our final thoughts. Mike, why don't we start with you?
Sure. Good question came up about how do I know that the stuff out on GitHub hasn't been booby-trapped? Microsoft is doing everything they can to scan the repositories. A lot of developers will create hashes of their known good code and then distribute the hash out of band so that you can prove that there has been no loss of integrity there. But I will say this, the Linux project, as led by Linus Torvalds, just fired a whole bunch of Russians that were developers on Linux because everybody is kind of nervous about this. So yeah, it's all I can say is buyer beware. It's free, but buyer beware.
Thanks, Mike. And Fred, final thoughts.
I want to say that without open source security software, Mike and I don't think we'd be here talking to you today.
Yeah, that's true.
I literally mean that. We would not be here if it didn't exist. And that's how long we've been relying on open source security software. Is the early 90s really was foundational for this. Mm-hmm. I've never not been using these tools. Frankly, one of the things, I'm a weirdo. I think there's a lot of weirdos probably on this call. This is fun. Testing this stuff, learn out of this stuff. This is freaking fun, people. So get out there, dig in, have a good time doing it. It's really rewarding.
Yep.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
Yep.
Take care.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for coming.
Thanks.